This informational webinar is one in a series of webinars designed to unpack requirements in 19 TAC Chapter 228, effective September 1, 2024. The goal is to uncover what is new in the 228 revisions, what is not new and was existing in the version of Chapter 228 that was effective August 31st, 2024, and where to locate all of the rules in the reorganized chapter. Some things to note for the whole series of webinars on 228 updates is that we will refer to the version of 228 that was effective August 31st, 2024 as Legacy 228, and the version that was effective 9/1/2024 as Chapter 228 or Current 228. Additionally, I may miss some of the finer nuances of updates, but I will try to cover those that I feel will be most helpful to EPPs to feel confident moving forward with understanding and navigating this new and improved version of Chapter 228. Today we will focus on the rules and requirements around records retention and also unpack the related evidence figure, which is not new but is improved. I am Vanessa Alba and I will be your presenter today. This presentation is being recorded and will be published on the EPP Training Events and Materials section of the Program Provider Resources page on the TEA website. To assist you during the presentation, it will be helpful for you to download a copy of the evidence figure found in 19 TAC section 228.13F and use it as a reference during the presentation. I will give you a few moments to download it so that you can have it handy. This slide was presented in the 228 debut webinar. It shows that Chapter 228 has been reorganized into subchapters to make it easier for readers to find relevant rules and requirements. The arrows point to the subchapters that include the requirements that we will cover today, including records retention and the evidence to be retained. Please note that due to the reorganization of the chapter, the citations of the individual rules have all changed, which I think is obvious to most of us. It is important to remember that because rules that carried over from Legacy 228 may appear to be different rules because they bear new citations or are organized around new neighbors, keep in mind that I've tried to highlight for you those rules that are new and those rules that carried over from Legacy 228. Subchapters B and D. The topics of records retention and evidence are found in more than one place in the Chapter 228. In Subchapter B, TAC identifies records retention as evidence that the EPP retains to demonstrate the EPP is compliant with all requirements. This is applicable both to entities attempting SPEC approval as a new EPP and to support the renewal of existing EPPs. At TEA, this impacts the evidence we look for and the new EPP applicant process and in the 5-year continuing approval reviews for existing EPPs. In Subchapter D, TAC additionally identifies that records retention is an obligation that EPPs have to all of their candidates. If there is a question about whether a candidate has met requirements for a certificate, it will be important that the EPP records retained locally and in ECOS are complete and accurate. The evidence figure embedded in 19 TAC section 228.13 provides guidance to EPPs on what needs to be retained in EPP records. Specifically, this slide identifies what is identified in current Chapter 228 related to records retention. The first bullet is paraphrased from 19 TAC section 228.13H and says, the EPP must retain evidence of compliance described in the figure 228.13F for a period of 5 years. The EPP shall retain documents that evidence a candidate's eligibility for admission to the EPP and all evidence of a candidate's completion of all EPP requirements for a period of 5 years after a candidate completes, withdraws from, or is discharged or released from the EPP. The EPP is responsible for making sure documents and records are secure. The second bullet is paraphrased from 19 TAC section 228.31I and says, an EPP shall retain documents that evidence a candidate's eligibility for admission to the program and evidence of completion of all program requirements for a period of 5 years after a candidate completes, withdraws from, or is discharged or released from the program. These were also similarly worded in Legacy 228. If you have maintained a copy of Legacy TAC, then the citations are here for your reference and/or comparison as you wish. Subchapter B, Key Updates Pertaining to the Evidence Figure. There was an evidence figure in Legacy 228, but that figure was updated in the current Chapter 228. The current figure was shortened and streamlined over the previous figure in an attempt to provide increased clarity and increased flexibility for EPPs to understand and streamline record keeping. As suggested on a previous slide, the evidence figure is directly related to the records retention requirement because the figure identifies acceptable records to be retained. If an EPP is asked for records, such as during a 5-year review or during investigation of a complaint, or for any other reason, then the EPP should be able to produce adequate records based on the advisement in the evidence figure. Here is a screenshot of part of the evidence figure. The figure is organized by 10 components. Notice that it is also organized into 2 columns. They are column 1 that says if the TAC requirement includes, and column 2 that says acceptable evidence of compliance is. As we go through the remainder of the presentation, start thinking practically about how, when, and where you can repurpose evidence that you collect for one component for use in another. For example, evidence of a conferred degree is found on an official transcript, whether it is collected at admission or after finishing a degree in an undergraduate, post-bac, or residency program. So for an alternative certification program, the transcript that reflects a conferred bachelor's degree that your EPP collects at admission is also evidence of a conferred degree, which is a certification requirement. The EPP would not need to collect another transcript prior to certification because that same piece of evidence can be used for two purposes: qualification for admission and qualification for certification. Now is a good time to talk about or and. In the evidence figure, where evidence of compliance includes the word and, that means multiple pieces of evidence are needed to meet the requirement. Where evidence of compliance includes the word or, you have options to meet the requirement. From this point on, I will break down the evidence figure to help you start thinking practically about TAC requirements and what the evidence looks like when TAC is operationalized. Component 1, Governance. Thinking practically about evidence of required meetings. How does the EPP demonstrate that the meeting happened and that the required participants actually attended? Minutes and sign-in sheets are concrete evidence because they show the meeting happened and who actually attended. Note that an agenda and committee participant list are not concrete evidence because they reflect what is intended but not what actually happened. In terms of governance, meetings of the advisory committee or other partnership meetings, such as those for residency programs, can be evidenced by minutes and sign-in sheets. The second requirement is about the qualifications of individuals associated with the EPP form and function, such as instructional staff and curriculum developers. The evidence figure provides guidance on evidence that can be collected that reflects the qualifications of these individuals. For example, to be initially approved as an EPP or to later add new certificate classes and categories as an approved EPP, the entity must provide evidence that the proposed program has the staff, knowledge, and expertise to support individuals in each certification class and category being requested. A resume or signed reference letter could be two sources of evidence of qualifications. Additionally, a valid educator certificate, official service records, and K-12 campus or district report card combined could be a source of that evidence. All of these documents are options that could point to educator certification, experience as an educator, and accomplishment as an educator. Note you will see that these types of evidence are repeated in Component 4 relative to evidence of qualifications of field supervisors, cooperating teachers, host teachers, mentors, and site supervisors, because these roles have similar qualification requirements that must be met as well. Component 2, Admission and Required Notifications. For evidence that candidates have met admission requirements, the EPP can get a lot of information from the official university transcripts submitted by the applicant, including enrollment in the university for undergrads, postbaccs, and residency candidates, degree conferred, such as for alt-cert and postbac candidates, admission GPA, content hours, and GPA 12 or 15 semester hours, and basic skills. A conferred bachelor's degree or completed college level coursework are demonstration of basic skills. The SAT, ACT, and GRE scores are included here because A, they can be used as demonstration of basic skills, and B, university EPPs are required to report these scores if the university collects them to meet requirements for university admission. As mentioned earlier, the transcripts are also evidence of a bachelor's degree for certification purposes, which will be referenced again later in the presentation, relative to evidence that candidates met certification requirements. There are a series of notifications that are required to be provided to applicants and candidates, so we include evidence of that usually in the admission component. How does the EPP provide evidence that they have notified applicants and candidates of information about the potential impact of a criminal history on certification, or have notified applicants and candidates of the EPP performance over time, or the variety of other notifications required, such as the exit policy of the EPP? The method of notification could be different for an applicant than for a candidate. For example, you may provide notifications on the admission application, which is accessed by applicants who will also be future candidates. But you may put information for a candidate in a candidate handbook or in a candidate portal, which would not be accessed by an applicant. Or you may locate information for all transparently on the EPP website. Some rules, such as for the complaints process, require the EPP to publish on the EPP website. Practically speaking, your evidence will be something like a screenshot, or a website link, or even the admission application, whichever mode captures the published notifications. Component 3, curriculum. Curriculum is another area where we can think practically about evidence of the requirements met. Let's consider that your EPP all of a sudden sees candidates struggling to be successful on specific certification exams, and their feedback on preparedness is not positive. You now need to run a diagnostic on the elements of coursework and training provided to candidates in that struggling certificate area or program. What types of evidence will you look for to show what is being taught to those candidates and how? You might circulate some standards alignment charts among the instructional staff to get the big picture idea of where the standards for the certificate are taught and uncover any gaps where one or more standards are not being taught. You also may review the syllabi for the courses in the struggling certificate area to understand the course requirements. If the syllabi have bibliographies of the research base for the instruction in that course, you can also understand if the instructor is integrating the most current research-based best practices. Additionally, samples of coursework materials, including standards-based performance assessments and aligned rubrics, will provide insight into the topics being taught in a course, including the skills that candidates are taught and how competency is measured for the candidates in that course. All of these are identified in the evidence figure because they are practically what would be reviewed for evidence of implementation of curriculum-related requirements. Component 4, program design and delivery. Component 4 is about the required coursework and training, educator-candidate clinical experiences, and support for candidates during the clinical experiences. There is a lot happening here in terms of candidate and EPP requirements to be met, and thus capturing and retaining evidence of those activities is varied. Examples are completion of the required number of coursework hours, early field-based experiences, candidate demonstration of competency or proficiency in implementation of knowledge and skills, successful completion of clinical experiences, including clinical teaching, residency, internship, or practicum, and candidate support through formal and informal observations. The evidence figure provides a variety of options for retaining evidence that these requirements have been met. To practically apply the evidence chart to this area, we need to think about common pieces of evidence. For example, to track and verify that a candidate has completed 50 FBE hours, or 490 clinical teaching hours, or 750 residency hours, or 160 practicum hours, a log is a clear key piece of evidence of completion of any of these requirements, because the log can be structured to capture hours and also engagement with the standards during those hours. The signature of the campus personnel who can vouch and verify that the hours were completed as stated on the log substantiates that the requirement is met. Another example for the EPP to capture evidence that a candidate demonstrated proficiency in a skill, a rubric would be needed, since that would be a performance assessment. We see this requirement both in pre-service coursework and training, and also in the supervised clinical experience. A rubric aligned with standards being performed would be evidence for pre-service coursework and training, as well as for implementation of skills in the clinical experience. The rubrics may look different based on what is being measured, but they are rubrics nonetheless. Looking more closely at the required clinical experience, the observation instrument used by field supervisors to formally observe candidates in clinical experience is a rubric. The candidate must demonstrate proficiency to qualify for certification. So the observation instrument would be designed to capture the level of proficiency demonstrated by the candidate for various standards. As such, the final recommendation provided by the field supervisor should align with the progression of proficiency recorded across all observations. Both the completed rubrics and the written final recommendations are retained in the candidate's record. Component 5, Evaluation of Program and Candidate. TAC requires that candidate progress be benchmarked and that candidate readiness be assessed. Additionally, the rules require that EPPs evaluate their program components for the purposes of continuous improvement of the programs. These requirements, which have not changed in word, have changed in location within the chapter. They were all together in one section in Legacy 228, but are now more appropriately divided up into the governance section and into the minimum EPP obligations to all candidates section. Thinking practically and efficiently about records retention around candidate benchmarking and readiness, can a rubric used to capture proficiency in standards during pre-service coursework and training also be evidence of a candidate's progress? Can the score report from the candidate's practice exam that shows readiness to test also be a benchmark document that tracks the candidate's progress toward the next step in the certification process? The answer to both of those questions is yes, if the program uses documents as such. Thinking practically about program evaluation, what does your EPP use to determine the effectiveness of various programs within your EPP? Do you collect candidate data via end-of-course surveys, or do you collect data via an end of EPP survey for finishers? Do you survey the campus personnel who support your candidates during FBE and clinical experiences? Do you have other diagnostics that you use based on published data? Do you have a long-term plan of continuous improvement that is supported by your findings? Or do you share your findings with your advisory committee for input and guidance? Evidence of any or all of these can be acceptable evidence of ongoing program evaluation. As we discussed earlier, minutes from an advisory committee meeting are evidence that you have an active advisory committee as required, but those same minutes can also be evidence that you are evaluating your program. Thus, one piece of evidence can support more than one TAC requirement. This will be unique to each EPP. Component 6, Professional Conduct. When the EPP is securing evidence that the candidate understands and is committed to adherence to the Educator Code of Ethics, there are a variety of ways that the EPP can capture this evidence. No one way is the most correct. The important thing to remember about this attestation is to make sure that the wording is clear and that the candidate signs it. Some EPPs secure this commitment through the candidate handbook, where the candidate signs a general attestation of receiving, understanding, and abiding by all requirements in the handbook. Some EPPs require the written attestation to be completed through their course, where ethics are addressed. Other EPPs place the ethics attestation on the admission application and require either initials on the specific attestation or a signature on the entire application. Whatever method is used by the programs in your EPP is acceptable. Just retain the signed document. For efficiency in records retention, note that the EPP can capture candidate acknowledgments and attestations for multiple requirements through a signed handbook page or through an application that contains multiple notifications. Using this method, the EPP would only have one document to retain as evidence of multiple requirements met. Component 7, Complaints Process. Subchapter G requires the EPP to have a complaints process and to have it published for access by a variety of individuals. This requirement has not changed, and evidence is self-explanatory. The process is on the website, is posted in your physical office, and is on a handout to be used as needed. TEA receives complaints from candidates who claim the EPP does not have a complaints process for them to follow. The first thing we do is hop on the EPP website and search for the complaints process that is required to be published. Sometimes it is not there. Sometimes it is there, but not transparent. Sometimes it is there, transparently published for the whole world to see. Our next step is to communicate with your candidate about how to access the process, or we will look up your process that we have on file and communicate that. You can contact your education specialist assigned if you are not sure about what complaints policy the EPP has on file with TEA, and we will assist you with submitting an updated one if needed. Component 8, Certification Procedures. When thinking about evidence that your candidates have met requirements for certification, consider what is needed for a candidate to receive an intern, probationary, and standard certificate. As we identified in the admissions component, an official university transcript is evidence of a degree conferred, which is a requirement for certification. Remember that the alternative certification program would not need to collect an additional transcript after admission, since the degree required for the certificate will be submitted at admission, because the alt cert route is not a degree granting route. Your benchmarking documents previously discussed can be evidence of requirements complete. For university programs, official transcripts collected after completion of the EPP can also be evidence of requirements complete. When a candidate is required to have a license, such as for Career and Technical Education or CTE, the license or certificate and a Statement of Qualifications or SOQ are the evidence. Since this is required for admission into the EPP should already have this documentation available for review prior to recommending the certificate. When the requirement calls for evidence of certification as an educator and classroom teaching experience, the valid SBEC issued certificate and the official service records from the district noting the required experience as applicable are evidence respectively. Component 9, Integrity of Data Submission. In terms of verifying the accuracy and completeness of the data submitted to the TEA each year, such as during a continuing approval review or during the investigation of a formal complaint, TEA will use the data gleaned from the evidence previously identified and compare it with the data entered into ECOS. For example, the GPA and subject-specific content hours that are required for teacher candidates can be verified using the official transcripts if you have retained them in your admission records. That admission transcript can also be used to verify the degree you uploaded when you recommended the intern, probationary, and maybe standard certificates. In another example, the data captured on your formal observation instruments, which you retain as evidence of clinical experience requirements met, can also be used to verify the integrity of observation and clinical experience data reported. Component 10, Instruction in Proactive Planning Techniques and Inclusive Practices. Component 10 is a statutory requirement that must be met for initial approval of an EPP or for renewal of an approved EPP. As such, adherence to this requirement is verified during the 5-year continuing approval review, since that process is involved in renewal of the EPP. This training must be evident in coursework, and the candidate must demonstrate competency in the clinical experience. As such, the evidence previously discussed for coursework and clinical experience will apply here. Evidence of topics taught in coursework can include syllabi for the related courses and/or instructional materials, including performance assessments and aligned rubrics. For evidence of competency in the clinical experience, we mostly see that included on the observation instrument used by field supervisors to formally observe candidates. Some programs have projects completed during the clinical experience where candidates demonstrate competency in this and other requirements. Whatever the programs within your EPP use to meet the Component 10 requirements are, save that evidence. And note, this requirement is applicable to all programs in your EPP. Thank you for viewing this presentation. If you have questions about the new evidence figure, its correlation to records retention, or how your records may need to be used by the TEA, please contact your assigned education specialist, and we are happy to work with you. So that we can capture your feedback, please scan the QR code to complete this brief survey. Thank you and have a nice day.